Carrie Barley. I'm the curator for the Alabama Agricultural Museum and there at Landmark Park. We are here today with Mr. T.Larry Smith, a historian in his own right, and he was born and raised here in Tumbleton, Alabama, and he is an expert on dowsing. He's going to teach us his knowledge and give us an overall idea of the practice. Thank you so much for having us today.
Glad for you to be here. Welcome to Tumbleton, Alabama.
A great place to be.
We used to be a big place. It's a lady. It's a woman. This is a simple rod, and this happens to be the first pair that I ever had. They're about 40 years old or older. Made out of coat hangers. The bottom portion of a coat hanger. Iron or metal coat hanger. And you just hold them out in front of you and close into your body and slowly walk over an area. Now I'm going to make these turn just to show you what happens. So when you walk over an unmarked grave, they'll slowly do this. To tell what if it's a male or female, you just use one. If you're right-handed, I use my right hand. If you're left-handed, you can use your left hand. But just let them stick out a little above. You have to learn how to feel the rod. Some people would squeeze it, hold it, it won't work. You got to let it be loose, but don't let it be so loose it's just like this. So hold it firmly, but yet loose. And when you walk over your grandfather's grave, that thing will turn slowly like that to the east. And that means it's a male. Now when you walk over your great-grandmother, for instance, or grandmother, you do the same process. You walk over with one first to determine if there's a grave there. Use both of them. And when you walk over the grave, they both will cross. But on your grandmother, you walk over her grave slowly, and it will turn to the west for the female, and that stands for the best. Now, a more sophisticated set of dowsing rods made by my good friend who was in the vault business and graveyard business. He made these out of copper wire, and he made the wooden handle in his little wood shop, and he put a sleeve in the handle so these things they're free to move easily. But you still do the same procedure with these as with the simple coat hanger rod. But these are easier to move, so you have to be real. You can hold these tight because they'll move inside of the handle. They'll turn. So if you walk over the grave, then they're going to do this just like the coat hangers. And you do the same procedure with these more sophisticated dowsing rods. If it's a male, it'll turn to the east. If it's a female, it's going to turn to the west.
What's the history of dowsing?
Well, dowsing goes all the way back to early times, ancient times, in the Middle East and all in that part of the world. And they would use dowsing to find gold and diamonds, things like that, and for water. And so it's an old art. But then, far as this area goes, when the first pioneers came in across the river at Fort Gaines, Georgia, they brought their willow tree limbs and forks with them, be shaped like a fork, and they would use those willow oak limbs to find water here. And our water table was much, much higher then than it is today. And so they could find water fairly quickly and dig a well by hand and hit water. Now in most cases, we have to call a man with a well drilling machine that'll go 2, 3, 4, 500 feet deep and deeper to find a good stream of water for their certain purpose. So that same principle was found to work on finding unmarked graves. And it will find in modern times, you can find buried electrical cables or buried pipes. So dowsing has been around for a long time, but nobody has been able to tell me why it works. Nearest and closest reason I've been given by physicists, they tell me that the best they can explain it to me, that it has something to do with positive and negative ions on things that are concave. If you're trying to find a grave, for instance, in the woods, an old pioneer grave, you might pick up tree roots. And that can be confusing. You have to really beware of your surroundings when you're not in an established cemetery, as far as graves are concerned. It's much easier when they keep the cemetery clean and free of trees and bushes and things like that. But it's an old art, but it's still around and being used today. And I have been called upon by various farmers to locate their underground buried irrigation pipes. They forgot exactly where they were when they buried them years ago. And so I'll go out in that field and let them tell me about where they think it is. And I have been able to find underground irrigation lines, and I would stick up a red flag about every 100 feet or so through the field, as long as I could find the pipe. And then he could go back later and dig down and do what he needed to do. And also I have been asked to go in established cemeteries, and most of the cemeteries still have some open spots, open spaces in the cemetery. Well, they want to know if anybody might be buried in that open space. If not, they would like to have a plot there. So I would go in there with my dowsing rods and scan it over, and in most cases I can tell them that there's nobody there, or there is somebody there. And I can also tell if that unmarked grave consists of a man or a woman. And you keep going back and forth with your rods across the grave to try and determine if that's a child or an adult. Picked this up when we started in our Henry County Historical Group. Began trying to locate all the cemeteries that we can find in Henry County. And when we started, we were told by the various funeral homes around that we might find 85 or 90. Well, as of today, we have found and marked, most of them by GPS readings, been able to find and mark 199 cemeteries in this county. We will never find them all, because a lot of the early pioneers and later on the people that would come into the county and settle and establish themselves, they might, and a family cemetery was quite common in those days. So we have a good many family cemeteries in Henry County, and you'll find those just way out in the open countryside, in the woods also. And we have been, there's been a lot of people to find out about our project, and timbermen and other people would contact me to go out and show them where their family cemetery is located. But now I do not go in the woods anymore. And I've never enjoyed going in the woods.
Well, how do you tell the difference between a female and a male and a child versus an adult?
Physicist professors that I have consulted about this tell me that it has to be that something is a little giving off different electronic signals from female bones and male bones. But you can walk over the grave with just one rod in your hand instead of two. And if that rod turns to the east, it's going to be a male. If that rod turns to the west, it's going to be a female, because that stands for the best. A beginner has to be careful that he does not manipulate the rods. He may want to, his mind may be telling him or her that they want to find that grave so badly that they will automatically make those rods turn in that direction.
How common was this practice back in pioneer times? Was it something that everyone, every family had someone that could do it, or was it just you had one person in every community that would be able to do this?
Well, back in those days, dowsing was used primarily to find water. And it was such a common practice with the early pioneers in the wiregrass, that we had professional dowsers. They were called dowsers, and you will find in the early census of the wiregrass, someone's occupation might be listed as a dowser. Well, that's what he did for a living. He went around finding water veins under the ground for the settlers to dig their water well. And so he was a popular fellow in the early days, in the early 1800s in this area. A dowser was, he had his certain kind of willow tree forks, tree forks, and they worked on the same principle as these to find grades. But those wooden dowsing rods would find water. There was something about the willow tree that it would be drawn to water. Now, I can't explain it. They couldn't explain it. But, and it was brought over from the old country, as people crossed the oceans to come to this country to settle. They brought their old customs with them. And so, but a dowser, he was a popular guy.
How did you become interested in dowsing, and who taught you? Who did you learn the practice?
Well, became interested in it from the time that I heard about it. I did not learn how until when I was in the land development and contracting business. That's when I learned it. I learned it from an old engineer and surveyor, and he taught me how to do it, because I might buy a piece of property in town and it was vacant. An old house might have been there and it was torn down. Well, I bought the lot to build a new house on, and I wanted to make sure if the house had a septic tank, or if it had, and when city water was run by the house, I wanted to know where the water lines were underground. I didn't want to hit them. So an old engineer and surveyor taught me how to do this. And so I've been doing it a long time. I stayed in that business of land developing and construction and dealing in real estate for 40 years. And so when I retired from that, I became Henry County's official historian, and started writing a newspaper article every week in 4 local newspapers on local history. I just sent an article to the papers this morning for next week. And so I became more interested in learning how to find graves. And so all of it just evolved, and I've been doing it a long time. But why it works, I do not know. And I've spoken with some smart minds, and they could not explain why. It's like when Thomas Edison is credited with discovering electricity. And one time a friend asked Edison, he says, "What makes electricity work?" He says, I do not know, but it does work. So I'm the same way with dowsing rods. I can do it, but I can't explain it.